This is something that I think everybody should hear, because I am going to try to explain a breakthrough that I am having that is unfolding in real time about my relationship to complaining and my relationship to suffering and how that robs me of happiness. And here's what happened this morning. I woke up and I felt this incredible flood of happiness and joy and gratitude because all three of our kids are home. And nothing makes me happier than when Chris and I are here at home and all three kids are here and we as a family are together. And so I feel this wave of joy. And almost immediately, a second wave came and washed over the joy and just washed it right out. And the wave that came over me was sadness and grief that they were going to be leaving in 3 or 4 days. I just felt this like heartbreak hit.
That wasn't even happening in the moment.
No.
Right. Anticipatory heartbreak.
And they just got here. Yeah.
And they just got here.
Right.
And it was so acute. And so I laid there for a minute and I thought, holy cow, why am I sad? I mean, they're here. And then, of course, I rolled over to kind of explain this to Chris, and he had been up for 2 hours. So there, the bed was empty. And I get up, I brush my teeth. I'm kind of thinking about this. And then I get a text from you, Amy. And every morning, Amy pulls a card for me. And if you don't know what pulling a card is, you will, because we are going to lean into this at the Mel Robbins podcast. She pulls a card, and it's a mindfulness practice. It's a way to get guidance from the universe, from universal truth. It's a way to tap into faith and magic in your life. And so I've become basically addicted to checking my phone after my morning routine and seeing what card Amy has pulled for me. And so Amy has a gift, because every damn time you pull a card, it's like some portal opens up and I am hit with divine wisdom. Don't you feel that way, Jessie?
And I don't even tell her.
What do you mean you don't even tell
She doesn't
her?
even need to know what's going on. She just gets the right card that is exactly what you need.
Yes. So here I am in this inquiry with myself about joy, grief, happiness, sadness, love, and loss, like just in it with myself. And so I check my phone, and Amy has pulled a card for me, and she has texted me the card, and she has texted me the description of what it was. And one of the things that I love about you, Amy, is that you not only text the card, but my favorite part is not the card. My favorite part is your enthusiasm about the card that you have pulled. Right, Jessie?
Yep. And how you spit it back out to us.
Yes. Like she literally goes, "This is your card, baby. Get ready for this incredible message." And then she goes, "This is the card you and I pulled back in July." I'm like, how the hell do you remember this?
I do. Well, because number one, this card I feel like there's a very strong connection to you and this card for a lot of different reasons. But you did get this card in July, but then you got it again when we were doing another reading for you, a past, present, future reading. And this was your future card. So this is always where you're going and where you are if you allow all of that like negative shit to go by the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you
anyway.
wrote, "I consider it the Mel card."
Yeah.
And then you told me the message, and the card is the Garden of Venus. Why don't you tell me what this card means? Like, what does this card
This card
mean?
has really deep meaning. And so immediately when I saw it, when you do these oracle cards, when you pull them for yourself or for other people, first of all, I get very much into your energy, and I ask for your guidance to come through.
Okay.
Not my own guidance, just for you. And so then you just kind of like let your senses take over. And the very first thing I saw was that there is a heart on this card that might not be seen by everyone. It's not the first thing that would jump out to everyone, but there is a heart on this card.
Yeah,
and that
because it's a picture, guys. Garden of Venus, beautiful garden. In the center is a huge white glowing opening.
yeah.
And that's what I looked at. I didn't even notice that there was a heart on that card.
Yeah, well, that's really positive that you looked at that white opening, because that is what's happening. There's like a big opening for you happening right now. So anyway, this card is about a bunch of different things, as these cards always are. And whenever you pull them, there's always a different message. But for me, immediately that message of just love and happiness and rest and enjoying what you've created came through for me. That's how I immediately felt for you. The description talks, however, about something that I think is really important, that maybe is what you latched onto. You want me to read it so that you can?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could read it for everybody.
There is a part. It talks about the sword and the mirror. I'll just kind of summarize it really quickly. The sword is you always needing to defend yourself, your point of view, your judgments, the way you are. That's the sword. It's like you're constantly in battle with yourself, with other people, with society, with money, with, whatever it is. Like you're just always defending. And that's, I think a lot of us have that natural posture in life. Just back off or don't hurt me.
Or how hard things are, gripping or fighting.
It's gotta
like
be hard,
Yeah.
fighting. Yeah, all of that. And it asks you to put down the sword and pick up the mirror and look at the beauty that you are, the natural state of who you are. And that's what we kind of talked about in this text chain that we had this morning. Like, this is your natural state of beauty and peace and love. And when you're so worried about what the sword's doing, you don't take time to accept that about yourself.
What I got in this moment, hearing you say that, is that the constant fighting with myself or fighting against the way things are, the way that they should be, is robbing me of this experience of love and happiness and joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to share with both of you and with you listening to us right now is that I had this insane breakthrough this morning. And I've been working on this breakthrough for 2 years because, in the middle of, the big kind of sea, I don't even want to say the word anymore, that
Right.
where we were all, locked up in our homes, I just had a reckoning with myself in front of a mirror. And I looked at myself and was like, you're miserable. And the harder you work and the busier you get, the more unhappy you are. And you've got to start to take your happiness seriously, Mel.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to figure out how to be happy. And that might come as a surprise, for you to hear as you're listening to Amy and Jesse and I talk to you, that I, at a baseline, was not a content or happy person. And Chris would always say to me, God, you're always like focused on what's wrong. It's never enough. It's never this. And I would reject that. Full stop. I'd be like, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really grateful person, which I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really positive person, which I am. I'm a really like, I have happy times. I am like, I'm not always, I couldn't even see it.
Yeah.
And so here's the major breakthrough I had this morning around waking up and having a wave of joy because all 3 kids are home and our family's together. Then it immediately being wiped away by grief and loss and fear and upset that, oh, no, they're going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
The mirror and my true nature is the love and the joy. And the second that the gripping and the fear and the but they're leaving and the this and the that, that's me picking up the sword. And I had this realization that, oh my God, I don't even realize how much I'm battling happiness inside myself. It's like this campaign and this campaign of misery. Like I pick up the sword, I start wielding it, and I'm fighting for misery.
Yeah. And there's always, when you have a sword in your hand, there's always something to fight.
Yes. And here's the thing. When I'm thinking about the kids leaving in 4 days, I'm not actually experiencing them being here.
No.
Right.
Right.
And then they're
Yeah.
going to leave, and then I'm going to be thinking about when they come back.
You're not present
And
to
I'm not
the joy.
present to the joy.
Yeah,
so I'm experiencing it on the surface. We laugh, we dance, we do this.
Yeah.
But deep down, I am engaged in a campaign of misery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because my mom is always focused on like what's not working. And she has bursts of happiness, and I so like want her to be happy. And there's always something wrong. And it's as if I learned to speak both English, and I also learned to pick up the sword and look for what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm learning as I work on myself is I'm learning that that's not the language that I want to speak anymore.
Yeah.
That thing, that the complaining that I heard, or the griping or the upset or the sadness or whatever it was, that constant campaign, that pick up the sword, don't get too happy, something's wrong, you want to go out to dinner, but I want to cook something. I can see you getting emotional,
Jesse,
Jesse. What's going on?
It was the 2 languages that you just said.
Yeah.
You just battle all the time with it. I get it.
Yeah.
That
and when
hit home.
I think we should call it the mother tongue.
Yeah.
That is the truth. Because to talk to your mom, you had to speak her language of, isn't this horrible? Look at your
Yes.
father. Oh my God. Prices have risen again. Can you believe? My mom would always say, holidays are women killers. I know. So she said that.
Wow.
She said and I had to kind of embrace that. And
Well,
Jesse and I were
did you
just,
also like go to the like, okay, I'm going to try to fix it. I'll try to make you happy. I'll try to.
Sure. It's our duty to fix it. We don't know any better as little kids. That's what we think. It's our duty to fix it. So pick up the baby sword.
And to fix it, you say, yeah, it is terrible.
It
Mom.
is terrible.
It is so, can you believe that?
Yes. Because that was something that I always did too. And maybe you guys did. I never wanted to betray my mother's sense of safety in the world and like have her feel unstable and have her take that out on me. So it was like I was always agreeing with the crazy that came out of her mouth. Like
Keep
I was
the peace.
keeping the peace. Oh yeah, and part of it, like Mel, when you say the mother tongue, part of it is that you it really was a language that you spoke and you didn't know any better. It wasn't like you were pretending. Like
Right.
you literally did not know
No.
any different.
Well, and same with her. Like my mom did not grow up in a loving household.
Right.
It was a super hardworking farming family. And, you know, I'm of course feeling terrified that when my mother listens to this, she's going to be super pissed off at me. And so I still have to say this because I don't want complaining or being present to what's wrong to rob me of experiences of joy. I do not want to be sitting here in my life right now where I can look in the mirror and I can experience these next 4 days. And instead, what the old me would do is I would be already in my head, living in the reality that they're leaving and telling myself a story. We don't live near our kids and I'm never going to see them again and something's wrong here. And I would bring that energy into my day-to-day life. And I don't want to do that. Like, I want to put the sword down. I want to experience my life day to day and not be searching for what's wrong and not be engaged in my own private campaign of, you know, this isn't happening this way and that is. And like, even right now, like we're recording this profound conversation and Eric and Brian are banging nails on the shed outside.
We're banging it out up here.
Yeah, we're banging it out up
there.
here. You know, like there's my mind searching for, oh, well, this, stop it, Mel.
Right.
Stop it, because you may not have realized that it was a second language that you're constantly speaking. Just like if your primary language that was spoken in your house was Spanish or it was Russian, you speak that fluently.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you, like, I feel like all of us have a verbal language and we have a subconscious emotional language. And I was sharing this breakthrough with Chris this morning. So he said this to me. He said, you know, so are you saying that in public you're a very happy, positive person, but in private you're sad and miserable? I'm like, no, it's way deeper than that. on the surface, I speak English. And I am a happy, positive, optimistic person. Because I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But deep down in the depths of my subconscious, there is another language that I am speaking. And I've labeled it a campaign of misery.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't identify with this notion of looking for what's wrong or arguing against your own happiness, everybody can relate to this idea that, as you're ready to go on vacation and you're at work, you're thinking about vacation. As you're on vacation, what are you thinking about? Getting back to work.
Back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And for me, that sort of internal, always on subconscious emotional dialogue is to search for something that is wrong right now or is about to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And in this moment, there is nothing wrong. In fact, I am living my greatest day ever because I'm here with you two, who I love. We are doing work that makes an impact that we fucking love.
Yeah.
Downstairs, I hear the voices of the people I love the most, and we're all together for 3 or 4 delicious days. And happiness and contentment requires you to look in the mirror and be where your feet are and let that joy and happiness flood in and not pick up the sword and gut the happiness by going, but this, but the rest, but the reservation, but they're running late, but the traffic, but this, but they're leaving, but, oh, someone's like.
Yep. If you're always looking for something wrong, you'll find it.
Yeah, and I
Right.
I never realized the extent to which that was my default.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also I want to say it is your default because it was what you needed to do, but it is not who you are, like at a soul level, right? It is not like truly who you are. It is just like that language, right?
Yeah.
Like when you say subconsciously, yes, that's true. You subconsciously you do that, but on a soul level, none of us are like that. Like we're all, this Garden of Venus state, which
Yeah.
is like,
Well, that's how we
joy,
were born.
peace. Yeah.
And that's who you
exactly.
are. You're
Yeah.
wired for joy. That's why you
wired
miss
for
it.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
wired for happiness. That's why you miss it. You're wired for connection. That's why you miss it when you don't have it. You're wired for love. That is your natural state. And, one other thing I want to say, because while it sounds like, oh, blame your parents, it's actually everything. It's what life does to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that as you go through life and you grow up, and especially, all 3 of us have survived childhood trauma. All 3 of us have, nervous systems that quickly jump to anxiety. All 3 of us anticipate what could go wrong as a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And most of our parents are wired that way too. And we have an opportunity, every single one of us, to break that chain of speaking at a default level to ourselves about what's wrong, about what's not working. We have the ability to separate the language you speak with your mouth from the one that you feel in your body at a subconscious level.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a great way to put it.
How are you going to do that now? Like,
I have no fucking
you have no
idea.
idea.
Well, like, how do you put down the sword?
Yeah.
Chris asked me the same question because I didn't put it in the language of the sword, but he's like, how are you going to change this? I'm like, I have been, first of all, I got to be nice to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to bring compassion both to me and anybody that is in my family or around me that engages unknowingly in their own campaign of misery. Secondly, I said to Chris this morning, I'm 54. It is as fluent inside of me as English. And I can learn a new language. But just like learning a new language requires you to practice it every day,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll slip into English if that's your default, or you slip into Russian or Spanish if that's your default, I got to make a commitment to myself to practice speaking and encoding and learning a different subconscious emotional language.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I slip into the one that I learned and have practiced forever. It's an emotional, subconscious default that you have had since before you could put words together. You know, we learned this from Dr. Becky, that from 0 to 5, before you've got your own words and sentence structure and ability to truly describe the world around you, you are absorbing while your brain is in a theta state, which is a state of hyper learning, like a giant sponge. This is why little kids can learn a second language like that. You're always learning 2 languages when you're born. You're learning the one that's spoken out loud, and you're learning the emotional language that is deeper underneath it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, your question, Jesse, how am I I have no fucking idea. I guess I'm going to write about it in my journal every day. I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to catch those moments where the wave that is positive, that I feel myself picking up the sword and gutting it. You know, and I see it everywhere. I see it in work. I see it in, even with the podcast, you know, we came out of the gates and this has been so wildly successful and the downloads grow every day and it's just been extraordinary. And there's like, I instead of basking in, wow, like we're making a difference. This is resonating with people. I feel that. And then I see myself pick up the sword and I'm like,
Right.
it's temporary. It's luck. You're going to plummet off those. And then I'm like, ah.
Right.
And then I come from fear instead of coming from my natural state, which is I just want to have these conversations that allow us to share our lives with people and connect more deeply and that make a difference for all of us.
Yeah.
I don't know. How would you guys like, I mean, first of all, what resonates with you about the language you speak versus this second language that we all learn 2 languages from birth?
I feel that. And I've felt that. I call it like my tribe language of how my parents talk about, you know, the big things like money and relationships and big life events, like how they view them. I noticed years ago that if I'm going to live the life that I want, I need to leave this tribe, not speak this language anymore.
Ooh.
And I did a lot of research around that. And like, how do I do this? Because it's painful to extract yourself from this
Family,
from your family.
Do you think that's what you experience? That is that sort of crunchy kind of thing that everybody has, even though you may love your family deeply, that there is still this sort of mismatch when you all get together because you're at different states of evolving,
right?
And different states of, we all speak this language with words, but we are all engaged in learning a new language at a subconscious emotional level.
Yes. We've all moved on in some way, but we have our family roles, we have our common language, we have our tribal, you know, and I say tribal in the sense that like any group of 3 people that get together create a culture.
Oh yeah, that's the Seth Godin research, right?
Right, exactly. So I decided I don't want to do this anymore. I am grateful for it. You know, like Con Marie, like, thank you for the lessons I've learned.
Yeah.
And I'm moving on here. I'm making a conscious decision to move on.
Well, you know, what's also interesting is I think when you're present to it, Jesse and Amy, that, oh, okay, there's this thing I speak and then there's this thing I want to feel deeply.
Yeah.
And when you can get in touch with what is authentically who you are and what you want to feel, what I've noticed is I have a much easier time, not only with compassion and love, but with boundaries.
Yeah.
Because I don't get hooked.
Oh,
yeah.
The emotional hooking in that is, that's
a fluency, because if you've ever been around friends that are bilingual, so we have very close friends that she grew up in, her dad's from Jordan, her mom is French, and so she speaks fluent French, and so does her husband, and the kids are bilingual, and we'll all be around them, and super close family friends. Hi, Mark and Maheen. What I've noticed is when they're all talking to us, it's all English. If they turn and say something to one another, they speak in French, because it's just like this thing. And I think emotionally, we hook into each other's emotional languages by default.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we do.
I want to go to another question that we have. Let's go to question number 4. I bet you've got a great answer for Anne Marie.
Hi Mel, this is Anne-Marie calling from Guildford in the United Kingdom. Absolutely adore listening to your inspirational podcast, thank you. Can you advise people who perhaps have a chronic illness and can't exercise or work full-time how they too can lead a happier and more fulfilled life? Sometimes we feel trapped and just grateful someone will even hire us. It's often a job to make ends meet rather than do something that we love and find fulfilling. How do you stay motivated and hopeful and keep joy in your life? How do you prevent yourself from spiraling and thinking the worst because you're sick so much of the time? Thank you so much and sending all love.
It's very tough. And I faced that last week when, my heart wasn't doing well or whatever was wrong with me. And I thought, it's so much easier to feel. I actually looked outside the window and there was the security guard outside the hospital. And I so much wanted to be him. I wanted his life where he wasn't caring about health. So this question hits home where someone has to think about their health all the time. And I think recognizing that makes it hard. I used to write in books, when I'd sign it, I'd say, happiness is a choice, Sean. I don't do that anymore because I actually still do believe happiness can become a choice eventually, but not in the immediate moment without any practice, and it's okay when it doesn't happen. And that takes way too long for you to write into every book, right? I think that there is a recognition
I have an idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
What if you wrote, happiness is an option?
I like that. Because choice seems to add a burden where I don't want there to be a burden, but a recognition that it's an option. I love that. I think I might use that now. That's great. I think that when we can't do something, we're outlining something that's a deficit. I can't exercise. But we know that most of these habits don't involve exercise. So there are things that we can do in those moments that can raise levels of happiness. I think the choice is just harder. I think the choice is harder when you're being racially discriminated against, or when you have a health issue, or when your kid is depressed. I think the choice becomes harder within those moments, but still is an option, as you're describing. And where I think we get meaning, even when our own body becomes our prison, is from other people. And I know that because I've done work with, the National MS Society. We did a whole campaign with them where we got, the person who is experiencing MS and a caregiver to come together, and they heard about these habits, and then we did it together, and then we videotaped their experience for the next 6 months as an encouragement for other people, so they weren't just hearing someone who's a happiness research talk about this. They could hear about it translated into the life of someone who's dealing with MS. And what I saw was that, as a researcher, I study people. I just study this not because I'm amazing at happiness and I need to tell everyone about it. I study the people who are able to create happiness even when it would be very difficult for me. Like if I lost one of my children, I do not know what would happen on the backside of it, regardless of all of this work. I don't know who I would be, but I do know people on the opposite side of trauma and grief who have done incredible things with their life that are incredibly positive. I just met someone who lost his daughter and is the head of a hospital system in the midst of COVID, and was just one of those people that just you walk away feeling like life is worth living. So I know it's possible. So given that you can see that people are doing that, I think it becomes, to your point, an option again. And then meaning comes from other people. So,
now, when you say meaning comes from other people, I want to be very clear, everybody, because we are also saying you have to stop thinking you'll be happy when you get in the relationship or lose the pounds or you finish the PhD or you have your first song playing on the radio. The I'll be happy when, or thinking that some achievement is going to make your life fulfilling. No. And I think most of us have heard that it's about what becomes fulfilling in life is working on this thing, climbing the mountain. So I want to be very clear that Sean is not saying that other people are the source of your happiness. What Sean is saying is that connection, meaningful connection with other people, creates feelings of meaning and joy and happiness in your life, and that serving others and helping other people creates meaning and joy. So this is not trying to counsel you that somebody else holds the key to your happiness. It's another one of those ways to think about happiness differently. Am I saying that correctly, Sean?
Yeah, I think saying it, and it's a very important thing to say. And also that if you're in a relationship with somebody that's harming you, you do not need to be in a relationship with that person, or you need to be able to find safe spaces outside of that. That being the case, we did work with, alongside that, we were working in Flint, Michigan, in the midst of inequality and discrimination and racism, which are real and visceral and pernicious negatives within a society. They could easily, when we came into the community, I was worried people would be like, we will talk about happiness when the jobs come back and when there's not lead in the water.
Yes.
We'll talk about happiness when there's not racism. And we only had money to work with the teachers. So we were trying to raise levels of happiness for the teachers so they'd stay for more than 2 years. And if their story was, I live in the midst of this society that's broken, I can't wait to get out of here, then of course they would want to get out of there. What we found while we were doing this is that only in the classrooms where we were able to raise the levels of happiness for the teachers, students, parents, or guardians' well-being scores started improving dramatically. So we were measuring the community, but we weren't doing anything we thought for them. We were only working with the teachers, and yet their well-being scores were improving. The students' test scores in those classrooms were rising, and we weren't working with the students yet. We were finding that if you could change the mindset and behavior of some of the individuals within an ecosystem, you could actually measure the impact of people 2, 3, 4 degrees separate that they never even met. And the reason I highlight that is, one, that makes us feel good about ourselves, but two, it's the reason for taking that next step. If doing this gratitude journal is just about me, it feels empty and vacuous, right? That it's like, it's just about my happiness. This is just like, going to the gym so I could look good, but why am I going to look good if I don't have someone to look good for, right? Like, you could get stuck in all those ideas. What we were finding in the midst of this is that when people were able to raise their levels of happiness, joy, and meaning, it caused other people to see that happiness was an option. But at the same time, that gave them the fuel for why my work is meaningful as a teacher. And we had this one day where they did a random act of kindness. We took teachers that are doing everything in their power to try and hold this community together, and we had them do one more thing. We had them on one day all come together and do a random act of kindness for the community. So, and we didn't know there was going to be a blizzard that day. So at like 4 a.m, they were giving donuts to road construction crews. They were going out to hospice centers, hospitals. This was their day off, the parent teacher, or the teacher in service day. They even went to the DMV to pass out happiness kits that they made until they got kicked out, because one of the managers actually said, this is just not part of our culture, which I thought was hilarious. But in the midst of this, you talk to those teachers who give everything all the time about that day, they immediately light up. Their joy, and my mom was a high school English teacher for 30 years. It was very hard to get her to do something for herself. But if she knew that doing something for herself could raise the levels of happiness for other people, it felt meaningful, right? And so what I'm hoping for is not that my happiness exists in somebody else, but like you're describing, that you can't hold, like there was a study that came out about it's better to live a meaningful life than a happy life. Which I thought, as soon as you split meaning and happiness, we've already made a mistake.
Yeah, isn't
right?
it the same thing?
Yes, they should be, because it's very difficult to keep, to stay happy when you feel like your life is meaningless. And it's very difficult to keep doing meaningful activities if you don't feel any joy doing that or any return on it. You have to have the two melded together. And I would say grit alongside that as well. And so what we're finding was that meaning was coming from our participation positively in creating a better world that was outside of just the individual. And that when you enhance and expand power out and let people be part of your life as well, that's when we start to see those larger gains in people's levels of happiness.
How the hell do I change my mindset? How do I stop trying to find it outside of me? I don't even know how to begin to find it inside of me. In fact, you mentioned that you were depressed, and I was reading an article where you were interviewed, and you said that you were writing in a journal during this period, and the first entry you wrote was, I don't remember being happy, and I don't think I'll ever be happy again. And now you're like the world's guru of happiness. So in that moment though, Sean, you had an experience that I think everybody has at some point. I'm not happy, and I don't think I'll ever be happy again. And so what's the first thing that you would want somebody to know if that's where you are right now?
I think the very first thing I'd want is actually the recognition, because I kind of wish I had known that earlier, that whole thing we're talking about. 'Cause I think you're right. I think we all have that moment where you realize, I thought I'd be happy when, and it didn't work. But then if you ask somebody why they're not happy, they'll tell you about one of their externals, right? I'm not happy right now because I don't have a boyfriend. I'm not
Yes.
happy right now because I've got this guy at work, right? I'm not happy right now because I don't have enough money. So I think the very first step might be acknowledging it, that the human brain is designed to foil any attempt that success will guarantee happiness. Because every time you hit one of those targets, we change what we think would create happiness. I think the best example of that is actually the pandemic, because I think at the beginning of it, in the middle of it, everyone thought, think how happy we're going to be when the pandemic wanes.
That's
And
true.
the pandemic is waning, and we don't have that guaranteed levels of happiness. And what we forgot was there wasn't 100% levels of happiness before the pandemic, right? So I think the first is a recognition that this isn't working. From there, I think that it requires a mindset shift and a behavioral shift. In that article and in the work that I do, I research what we can do to create happiness when the world doesn't look like it should. And I think one important caveat to that is that while I'm talking about what we can do internally, that doesn't negate the need for external changes.
Yes.
We have systemic reasons while there's inequality, discrimination, racism that we should fight.
Absolutely.
I believe what gives us the power to fight that is the internal changes.
Yes.
So, and that everyone needs to do it, not just, the people seeking happiness, right? And the people who are being discriminatory need to do it too.
So let's start
But-
with the mindset. What is one step, one simple step that somebody who is sitting alone, like Sean, unhappy Sean, back in, the mid 2010s, writing, I don't remember being happy and I don't think I'll ever be happy again. How the hell do you change your mindset? Because if you keep saying that to yourself, you're not going to be able to access happiness within.
Right. Well, I think there's something unique in that moment because I was attempting to do something about it because I'm trying to write in a journal to be happier. I'm just like, I don't think this is going to work, which we know from research, that's not a great mentality. Like you can predict the course of treatment based upon whether or not you believe the doctor can heal you, right? So that was not an auspicious place to start.
Okay, so Sean, are you telling us that what you're about to tell us to do is going to work and we should believe in our ability to change our mindset and to take actions and to access happiness?
Yes, I would wholeheartedly say that. Not only because I've experienced myself, but then we've researched it ever since. I mean, what I've learned in this research is that depression was not the end of the story at all. And that even in the midst of a broken world, in fact, only in the midst of a broken world, have we ever been able to create happiness. So the question is, how do we do so? I think the starting point is realizing not only that our strategy wasn't working, but acknowledging that there are multiple realities in this moment. And one of them is, I don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, or I don't have this money, or I don't have this job that I want, or I'm frustrated about whatever it is. I think when you acknowledge that that's true, you could say that's one reality, but there's also some other realities as well. Last week I went to the hospital because I was having chest pains.
You were?
Young, yeah. I was in ER. I missed my very first talk in 2 decades. And, I realized in that moment when they strip you of kind of everything and, the doctor's going to knock on the door. When the doctor knocked on the door, I was like, this could change my life. It didn't. I was completely fine. But in that moment, like my whole life changed, right? My whole life could have changed and was completely disrupted within those moments. I think when we realize that there's multiple realities in that moment, one of them is I missed a talk. I'm not with my family. I'm in a hospital I don't want to be in. That's true. On the other hand, I'm going home today, right? I'm going home to 2 kids that I love and a wife that I love, right? Those are equally true, but in the same reality. And because my brain has a limited amount of resources, I need to choose. And I need to choose what I'm going to be focusing my brain on. there is so much negative in this world that I could spend the entire rest of my life focusing upon that and upon my fear. But that doesn't serve me at all. It's not a valuable reality for me. That in the midst of these multiple and true realities, I'm going to look at the ones that and focus on the ones that are going to allow me to fix the negative parts of my life, or that are at least going to give me the optimism and happiness and joy to take the next step and the next step. In depression, I just needed a step forward. I felt like I just stopped moving. So I started doing these habits, and these are the habits that we know work. And these are all the things you know about as well, right? The gratitude, for example. And I think that this would be my answer to someone sitting there and to that, that 26-year-old boy who is feeling this, was in those moments, I needed to scan. I need to stop scanning for all the deficits in my life. And I need to use some of those finite resources to scan the world for the things that I was grateful for. And it was hard because my brain kept being like, yes, but what about this?
Yes.
But what about this thing you don't have, right?
Yes.
So I had to literally train my brain. And we train it exactly like we've seen anything else with the human body, is I had to keep doing it, right? Like I can't build a bicep if I only lift a weight once, then I'm done, right? I had to do it every day. And I had to create a pattern out of it, even when I wasn't sure it was going to work. And even when I could see no change in my life. I'd say for the first, easily for the first 2 weeks, I saw no change in my life.
Well,
I was
want
sitting there trying to.
Oh, go ahead. You sorry.
I'm just sitting there writing down things I'm grateful for, and my life still feels terrible. Like I remember breathing hurt when I was depressed, because like everything hurt, like and everything didn't seem like it was worthwhile. I
What
think one
kept
thing
you
that's really
kept
important
going?
to say. So that's the thing. I don't get to talk about this much in any of the interviews, so I'd love to talk about this too, because I think you're going deeper, than some of the surface questions we normally get. I think that the habits are what pulled me out of depression. I write my gratitudes. I journal. I do exercise. I write a 2-minute kind note almost every day. I'd say 90+% days since my mid-20s. I know that when I don't do those things, it's like when I don't brush my teeth, I get this film in my mouth. That's what I feel like my world looks like when I don't do those habits. Those habits are the building blocks for creating happiness. But the turning point for me, which I never get to talk about, the turning point for me in all of this was actually not me. My job was to make sure other people didn't get depressed. So I kept trying to be there for other people. I was just supposed to be this paragon of, of knowing what you were supposed to do and optimism, right? And I kept going deeper and deeper in depression because I knew that there is a dissonance between what I was feeling and what I was showing to the world. The turning point for me and what actually got me to try to do those habits was at the bottom of the depression for me. I turned to my 8 closest friends and family and told them that I was going through depression. And, a couple of these people were sort of my competitors there at Harvard, right? Or my peers. And I told them I was going through depression. I said, it's genetic. There's nothing you can do. My grandmother, grandparents, and like, it's genetic. I just wanted to tell somebody. But immediately the groundswell of support was phenomenal. They kept calling me. They emailed me. They met up with me. One of them brought me cupcakes. It's not what I did it, to get cupcakes. But as soon as I did that, everything changed. And the reason for it was actually a study I found way later in my life. It was a study by these 2 researchers in Virginia, and they found that if you look at a hill you need to climb in front of you, if you look at that hill by yourself, your brain shows you a picture of a hill that looks 20 to 30% steeper when you're alone compared to that hill that you look at of the same height while standing next to someone who you're told is going to climb the hill with you. So I said that in a convoluted way. When you're alone, hills actually look 20 to 30% steeper to the visual cortex, which is amazing because I thought we have this objective view of the world, right? That's bad. This is good. This is how tall that mountain is. And what we realized was it was one of those matrix moments where I realized that the world is not objective, it's subjective. And that hill, those challenges are collapsing and expanding based upon whether or not you think you're radically alone going through this and trying to get out of this, or whether you're with other people. So as soon as I did that, as soon as I opened up to other people, that was the turning point, because it was the move from happiness as a self-help idea to this recognition that happiness was not an individual sport at all. And suddenly that hill of overcoming depression in front of me dropped by 20 to 30%. And they opened up about things they were dealing with. None of them was depression, but it was just challenges they were experiencing. And we started creating these meaningful narratives and social bonds that made me want to do the habits because there was something worth doing the habits for. So it was a combination of habits and social connection and a mindset shift that allowed in that moment to break from this idea that nothing matters and that there's nothing that I can do that matters and I have to just wait for the world to change.
Well, it makes perfect sense. And it reminds me of the fact that the Surgeon General just had that op-ed piece that went viral yesterday about the epidemic of loneliness. And in his op-ed piece in the New York Times, he talked about his own struggle with it and how the turning point was him admitting, just like you did, to his college, to his family friends, and to a few colleagues that he was really struggling with this. And it was their checking in on him and them sharing back that they felt disconnected from social groups and from themselves as well after the last 3 years that really was the turning point. But I love that you added that research because it is true. When you are down and sad and you feel like a sad sack that nobody wants to hang out with, that's the story you tell yourself. And that story then and the emotions that feel low make you keep isolating. And it's when you reach out that you change the behavior and you change the narrative. And then that provides a little bit of that intrinsic lift that you need, that maybe there is something I can do. Maybe there is hope. I want to go a little bit deeper on this because you've been there and I've been there and lots of people listening have been there and are there right now. And so when somebody like you come in or I'm sitting here on the mic, it's so easy to be resigned and like push everybody away and be like, well, that's great for you, Sean, but you don't know what I'm going through. And I think this question, Andrea, it's actually number 3. It's Charmaine. Let's play Charmaine's question because I think it's going to help us even go a little bit deeper to provide some hope, Sean, for somebody who's really feeling like I've tried everything.
Since my teen years, I've been asking myself, why am I here? What's my purpose? How do I create happiness within myself? I've made so much progress, yet right now I feel lost. I feel like a failure. I feel not good enough. I feel like I'm not a good girl. I feel like I'm not a good enough mom to my daughters. I feel selfish. I feel off course and like I'm not living up to my potential. I've done the work. I know this is coming from my limiting beliefs, trauma, projections that I have taken on as truth. Yet, here I am, feeling lost, alone, and frankly stupid. I do understand the privilege I possess. I practice gratitude. I know I am blessed. And I do a lot of things right. I don't think I'm depressed. I'm not completely unhappy. So what the fuck am I? I'm in some goddamn vortex of nirvana and hell.
Sean, what pops out at you?
So many things. First of all, how self-aware this person is, right? To be able, in the midst of this, to be able to identify the stages that they've been through, where they are currently, a recognition of the good, but also feeling like that they don't feel good enough and that there's more potential. What I kept hearing in my head over and over again is, this sounds like me. This sounds so human. I think we fluctuate all the time between this, like, I've got things going, and then, wow, I certainly don't. Like, if I have a really productive Monday, I get everything done and I'm super cleaning the house. Tuesday and Wednesday are terrible. Like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to do anything. I feel like I waste every Tuesday and Wednesday whenever I have an amazing Monday. I think that that's because we swing, right? And I think what our hunger for is, if our hunger is for a mountaintop experience all the time, that we always know that we're loved, that we're always amazing, that we're always beautiful and the smartest person in the room, I think that that's an illusion and a false desire, because I think it's an accurate reflection that we are not living up to our potential. I think that that's true all the time. I think that I could be doing better as a dad. I could be doing better as a husband. I know that when I work really hard at being a great dad, I know I immediately look around at all the people that are doing amazing things at work, and I'm like, whoa, I'm so behind. Then when I do a ton of stuff for work or travel ever, then I'm like, oh, I should be a better dad, right? I swing back and forth between this. And I think what we need are those anchor points in the midst of it.
Hmm.
So if what and where those anchor points come from, um, you had me on the show or to join you because I researched this, but I also went to the divinity school before getting into this. So what motivated my beliefs in why positive psychology mattered came from this belief that um, the story we tell ourselves and the lens through which we view the world changes how we act in it and where we find our meaning and where we find that value. And I think that those narratives, those belief systems, can answer some of those questions about how can I feel loved even when I'm not achieving my highest, right, or my potential. I think in the world that's very difficult because then we get on Instagram and we know exactly who's doing great, based upon likes, right, or based upon some sort of quantification, or money can tell you who's doing great and who's not, and none of those fill that void. So where those anchor points could come from, I think that they have to come from other people as well. There was a study that came out of Stanford that found that loneliness had nothing to do with actually the number of people within your life. Loneliness was simply the absence of meaning you felt in the relationships with other people and their meaningful impact upon you. That if you weren't doing anything meaningful for other people's lives, then you didn't feel social connection for the people that are around you all the time, right? And vice versa. So if that's the case, if meaning is what's driving our levels of happiness, then I think my grandmother said it, she's like, if you want to be a friend, if you want a friend, you have to be a friend. And I was like, okay, that's overly simplistic. I
Not
also want a
really,
girlfriend,
actually.
right? That's not working out for me. I can't be the girlfriend, right? So I, in that moment, like I didn't understand. Now I get it. What we're finding is that when people are experiencing that fluctuation back and forth, I think we're searching for meaning, and people search it for in different ways: religion and philosophy and psychology. Um, I think that a lot of the things that we search for don't work out for us, which is why we get to the point where she's talking about where we feel this vortex of I've got it, I don't have it, got it, I don't have it, because we're reaching onto things oftentimes that are illusory while we're grabbing onto things that are true. My mentor Tal Ben Shahar said that you're never as great as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are. And what I loved about that is that meant that there was a middle path in the midst of it, right? That sometimes when I think I'm a great speaker or whatever it is, then I get humbled very quickly by anything, right? Or if I think that I'm not doing great, then occasionally I'll get an email and it's like, hey, this was really important to me, right? That middle path was actually the one that I wanted to be in. And it's this recognition and being okay with, I am not at my full potential, but that's okay. And the reason that's okay is because I'm having a meaningful impact upon other people. So that habit that I mentioned of writing a 2-minute positive email praising or thanking someone else, I found that one to be probably the most helpful of any of the things that I've researched, because you can take someone in a socially isolated state with high levels of introversion, and if every day they scan for one new person to write a 2-minute positive email to, they stop on day 8 unless we pay them $15. On day 8, that's when they realize fully that they're not a crazy extrovert with all these friends that they could write to. They're like, I wrote to everyone on my favorites list and my mom twice. That's everyone. And then they scan and they remember, who's that mentor who got me into this job? Or who's that high school teacher that seemed to have some answer to some of those questions that person was just asking? Or what about my kid's first grade teacher who transformed my son's life, but I don't talk to them anymore because my kid's in second grade.
Right.
And you start to see all these people that are in our lives that we're not connecting with, and a 2-minute email thanking them or praising them or saying, I've seen how you've been going through breast cancer, and it inspires me that you're able to find happiness in low health when I struggle to find happiness when I seem to have higher health, right? That those moments, that just brief meaningful act using technology for 2 minutes, we found that if you do it for 21 days in a row, your social connection score rises up to the top 15% of people worldwide, right? That's including extroverts, right? And what we found was that you were lighting up these nodes of meaningful connections on your mental map of social connection. And that I think if you look at the philosophers, I think if you look at religion, I think if you look at psychology, they keep breaking down this idea that you can achieve happiness alone, that you could just figure out your thoughts enough and then you did it. You can just maintain your happiness. That happiness and meaning only come from this interplay with the ecosystem, with others around us.
I love
And
that.
there's this,
I want
okay.
to go ahead. Or if you're about to talk another study, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to tell one quick study. It's a
Please.
beautiful one. It's not about humans. You probably heard this one. This was also in the New York Times as well. They had there's a study where they found all these fireflies. Fireflies everywhere light up individually and randomly in the dark, and that's how they attract a mate. And their success rate per night per bug is 3%, which I'm told is good. But these researchers found on opposite sides of the globe these two species, one in Southeast Indonesia and one in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee that you can take buses out to go see. And these fireflies have these neurotransmitters that allow them to all light up and all go dark at the same time, which is beautiful, but not that smart because we live in a survival of the fittest world, right? We're told be the fastest, smartest, brightest light shining, otherwise you'll never be successful. And at MIT, they studied these fireflies and they realized we just didn't understand how systems work. That when they lit up together, seemingly with their competition, the success rate doesn't drop. The success rate goes from 3% to 82% per bug. It's not like one bug does better. The whole system was doing orders of magnitude better than we thought was possible because as they lit up together, their light became brighter. And it was attracting more and more potential mates than a single light would have been able to do and create these virtuous cycles. And we kept seeing the same thing when we looked at humans. We found that the greatest predictor of long-term levels of happiness, as you know, one of the greatest predictors is social connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's the breadth, depth, and meaning in your social relationships. So it's not something you could figure out in your head and then you did it and then you can hold happiness forever. It's about finding a way of lighting up with other people and getting them to light up as well.
So, Sean, what I love about what you just said, especially in response to that question from Charmaine, is that I was listening to her just tick off one negative, nasty, critical thought after another. I could feel like this heaviness. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, wait a minute. I bet happiness is broken into two things. It is from the neck up, and it's the things that you tell yourself. But it is also, and probably way more important, that you think about the things that you're doing from the neck down. And that's where these habits come in. That if it's all doom and gloom from the neck up, you're not going to feel any sort of motivation, hope, or interest in lighting up with everybody else. But if you can force yourself to start ticking off these simple habits that you recommend, that you practice, that you've researched, and you just highlighted the one of taking and making a 2-minute note, just a 2-minute note every single day for 21 days, it will have an impact in how you feel, which of course will start to shift all that shit you've been saying to yourself, which probably is stuff that you heard your parents say to themselves. And so what I love about your research is that you're also making it actionable, because I think that's part of the problem, that when we feel shitty and we say shitty things to ourselves, we don't take the actions that actually change it.
I heard one time I was on a plane and the woman sitting, I don't know, kitty corner behind me and, to the back, she said she was talking to somebody else loudly that she had just met about all these psychological understandings about herself, like literally a litany of all the psychological problems that she had. And I realized she said she'd been going to therapy for years. She had this incredible knowledge about herself and understanding where she was. And it didn't, at no point did she ever mention anything she was doing about it. Right. She was talking to a stranger about it. Right. Which, was more trauma dumping than actually trying to move forward. But I think there's this moment where I really thought that if I read enough books that I'd find happiness, right? I thought that if I read enough books, I'd be smart and then people would like me. That was completely not true, right? And I think that we take these paths, and I love what you're saying there is that there's this interplay between the beliefs and the actions that we do. You see the same thing with religion, right? Between this faith and works, right? Like it's the things you believe, but if you say you believe those, but you're not doing any of those, I'm not sure you actually believe these things, right? That there's got to be a connection between those. And what I would say is, in addition to that, is don't try to do it alone, right? I think that we treat happiness like self-help. Like I know our books are in self-help sections sometimes, right? But as soon as we do this on our own, without that friend, without that mentor, without those people that we're doing meaningful acts for, then we get frustrated very quickly and think we're doing something wrong. And what's wrong is actually the formula. Like happiness never works out if it's an individual pursuit. And
I
that's one
love
of those
that.
other mindset shifts I think was crucial, um, to find that there wasn't, you can't do enough yoga to force yourself into happiness unless that yoga causes you to be more peaceful with that interaction with your mother-in-law.
Now I want to talk about the third aspect of happiness. And we're going to unpack this with a question from a listener named Steve.
Hey Mel, this is Steve. Mel, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being your authentic self right there in front of us, changing lives. And you truly are amazing. And I really want you to know that. I was wondering today if you could talk about inner peace and the difference between that as opposed to material possessions, money, status, job titles, you name it. And instead, the feeling of happiness within yourself to be comfortable with. Thank you, Mel.
Oh, Steve, first of all, thank you for saying such kind and heartfelt things about how I'm showing up. I really, really appreciate it. Makes me feel warm. Second, this question about happiness with yourself, inner peace, as opposed to chasing those material possessions, job titles, this is really front and center in my life right now. And so I've been thinking a lot about this person and what he means to me, the person that he was, how he made me feel as a friend. At the end of the day, that's what truly matters, right? I mean, you're never going to see a hearse limo pulling a U-Haul to a graveyard because we can't take all that shit that we've been chasing down in life with us. And it truly doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel about yourself, the kind of person that you are, and what we know based on the research is the quality of the relationships that you have. And the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. I say it over and over and over again. And that is very closely tied to inner peace. Because if you're beating the hell out of yourself, if your dialogue about yourself is super negative, that's not going to make you happy. And inner peace, the term that you used, it is defined as feeling content and secure. Dr. Daniel Gilbert, who is a professor at Harvard, he did this huge study that close to half of our waking moments are spent thinking about something other than what we are doing in the moment. And so when you talk about inner peace, study after study shows that a wandering mind, thinking ahead, worrying about what's next, I'll be happy when this happens, not being present, that a wandering mind is deeply connected to unhappiness. Because if you're always wandering ahead or worried about what's next or chasing down something that hasn't happened, I'll be happy when, you're never actually in your life. A wandering mind is the opposite of inner peace. And when your mind wanders, and look, you are able to think ahead. You're able to look back. It's one of the amazing things about being human. But when you live in a state where you're never present, you rob yourself of the extraordinary, ordinary moments in life. That inner peace, that contentment, that security, that you're okay, that you're aware of what's happening, that you're present to it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Research shows that the amount of time that you think you have left to live, it shapes your priorities now. And if you think you have a ton of time, you're often thinking about the future, but you're not in the present right now. Yet research shows that the nearer you get to the end of your life, the more you begin to appreciate the presence, which is why, despite the fact that most of us, say, oh, old people are grumpy, that's actually not true. That's a myth. Research shows that people are their happiest in the later years of their lives. Why? Because older people, everyone over 70, they're much more likely to be present and not worry about the bullshit that you and I wrap ourselves around the axle about. They're more present in the moment to just be happy with the extraordinary, ordinary aspects of life. I was just with my parents. It's so funny because they're in their 70s, and I noticed their life is very simple. They get up, they go for a walk, they see their friends for breakfast, they play golf, they play mahjong, they read a book, they watch the sunset, they go to a friend's house. They're in the moment. They don't need some big thing to chase. They're just in the moment, enjoying the feeling of living. I want to say that again. Part of inner peace and being present and being alert in your day-to-day life is the feeling of actually living. It means you're no longer an autopilot. You're able to pay attention to what's in front of you. And the real superpower is being able to do that no matter how old you are. Mindfulness just means connecting with the present moment. Inner peace is just about being present. So how can you bring this into your life? There are 2 ways I'm going to suggest that you do this, okay? Number 1, when you are around other people, actually listen to them. I didn't say hear them. I said listen to them. There's a big difference between hearing what somebody says and listening to them. Listening to someone is when you actively give the other person the experience that you are present. And your attention is the most basic form of love that you could give somebody else. And practice listening and being present and making somebody feel like you are right there with them, not in your head, being in the moment. It is an act of love, and it is a way to cultivate mindfulness and to cultivate that warm connection. The second way that you can tap into this is that when you're doing a task, just something in your ordinary life, hyper focus on it. I call this moving meditation. And I'll give you 2 examples. Number 1, I love to eat nuts, okay? Little confession. I like the blistered peanuts, salted, from Trader Joe's. And I love myself some smoked almonds. So I'll grab a handful of those. And one way that I practice being present and mindful is I eat them one at a time. And I try to notice the difference in taste between one nut and another. And it's pretty surprising. Like, you eat a handful of nuts, you don't really taste a big difference of anything. You eat them one at a time, it's amazing how it pulls you into the moment. The second thing that you can do is I love having a flower right at the kitchen sink because I love flowers and it pulls me right in, and I will stare at that flower and be in the present moment. A third way that I practice this inner peace, I practice this eudaimonic type of happiness in my day-to-day life, is savoring the moments. So last night, I taught Oakley, our son, how to make his absolute favorite recipe, which is from the cookbook 6 Seasons that my mom bought me, and it is called beef with lots and lots and lots of onions. It is the easiest thing on the planet to make. You take a hunk of beef, you brown it, you throw some garlic in, you throw some thyme in, you throw a little butter, little wine in, and lots and lots and lots and lots of onions. That's it. And then you bake that sucker at 300 for like 5 hours, and the whole thing melts into this soupy, messy, amazing goop where the onions disintegrate, and it's like shredded beef and a French onion such and such. And we just had so much fun. I was so in it when we were cooking. And because I was in the moment, I wasn't wandering ahead. I wasn't thinking about anything else. I was with him. I was happy. And so let's go back to our metaphor. Being in the present moment is a lot like walking on the beach. Whether it's a stormy day or the ocean is still, whether it's raining or the sun is rising or the sun is setting, or there are amazing waves that you want to surf. When you're walking on the beach, a great walk is one where you are fully present. You feel the sand between your toes, the wind in your hair, the salt on your skin. You're staring at the ocean and gazing at the beauty no matter what kind of day it is. You're not thinking ahead. You're not reflecting on the past. You're just in the moment, happy. That's what happiness is. And so when you are thinking about happiness, always come back to this metaphor because it embodies 84 years of research and studies around the world. The waves remind you to have fun. Get off that blanket of yours, grab your friends, and jump in the waves and play. The big still ocean, swimming, floating, it reminds you to get into the deep end, and it's way more fun in there if you're floating around with your friends. Nothing like a warm day. You want those warm relationships. Spend more time with them. Invite them to the beach with you. That's who you want on the sand, on the towels, in the water with you. The people that make you feel warm. And finally, walking on the beach, being present, being in the moment, constantly coming back to these 3 fundamental things. And the fact is, you never know how much time you have. You just don't. So now more than ever, I just want you to not only appreciate the moment, I want you to take these small steps to truly enjoy the moment and be happier in your life. When you talk about the little voice in the back of your head, what does that even mean?
There's often a sort of running dialogue or set of opinions inside of us that are in the background to our experience of life in the present. And this can make a huge difference to how we respond to life in the present, how we think about ourselves and how we think about the world around us. So there's a lot more going on inside of us than what we're taking in at the moment.
Am I ever going to escape the stuff that happened in the past? Am I ever going to get rid of the negativity? That little voice started to already come up, but then you just said that you can take steps to have some control over this. So there is good news here. We're not just like at
Absolutely.
the whim of this, right?
No, if we pay attention to it, then we can have control over it. Like so many things in life, if we don't pay attention, we're not able to exert control. And here's the place for curiosity about, what do I think of myself? When I'm sitting quietly, what's running along in my mind? What's my self-talk like? Do I have conclusions about myself that may be, in some cases or in many cases, unfair? So things that haven't gone well in the past. Am I running that forward? Oh, if the last 3 relationships didn't go well, there's a person running forward that, they'll never go well, or I'm not a person who's ever going to have that, right? These are the things that we can get into our minds that start impacting us very, very deeply, that we can change if we go and look at it. So if a person says, wow, there's such negativity running in my head that I'm never going to find someone. And here I am trying to find someone and trying to date and to find a good partner. And I'm doing this, but all the time what's running along in me is, this will never work. And maybe that links to a really bad experience a couple of years ago that is emotionally very powerful. And maybe I can acknowledge that and say it's emotionally powerful, but it's not determining anything. In fact, I don't want that running along in my head. How about I can be a good partner to someone, or I can find a better job, right? How about things that more accurately reflect me, as opposed to things that can automatically be going on in our minds that are quite negative that we're unaware of. So the key here is paying attention, is curiosity and interest in ourselves and how we think of ourselves and our place in the world around us and our ability to navigate in the world around us, and looking at perhaps some of what may be negative, because negative things are stronger. They're more what's called salient, right? We have a salience bias, which means our brains pay more attention to the negative, which is part of a survival instinct, that we want to remember negative things because those memories may help us survive in the future. But then we start to weigh more heavily negative things across the board, and we can go and look at that and decide, what is really my opinion? What do I really think? As opposed to something that is a reflex inside of me that may have a great deal of influence on my decisions and the outcomes of, my strivings in the world.
Well, what was interesting about what you just said is you said this kind of question, what do I really think? What that little voice is saying to you is that I think some of us are so used to hearing that negative voice that we don't realize that we could get to a point where we could think something different. You know what I mean?
Right. It's a way people talk about learned helplessness, and this has been a topic for a long, long, long time. And a lot of learned helplessness is often really that we're not paying attention to something. The number of times that in the role of a therapist, right, I've been talking to someone, or even in my own therapy, I've been on the other side of it, where either I'm inquisitive about the person, or in this case, my own therapist would be inquisitive about me and what's going on inside of me, and asking questions, and then realizing, like I have this conception that is going over and over again in my head, and I'm not even aware of it. I've never actually put words to it, right? It's going on inside of my mind. That's very, very different than putting words to that. So after a number of traumas, which I write about to some degree in the book, I started to have a feeling that I'm just cursed, and things won't really go well, or if they go well in one way, they won't go well in another, right? That somehow there is like a force watching over me and making sure that things don't all go well. And that if something goes well, then negative things will happen too, because I started to have a very, very different view of myself and how I was able to or not able to, or I was at the mercy of maybe the world around me. Because when some negative things happen, especially in sequence, or even just one big thing, or sometimes a bunch of small things that we might not even be aware of, it can change how we feel inside. And then this stream of negativity was making me, for example, my mood was lower. I felt much less hopeful. I felt more beleaguered. There was more anger and frustration in me. And by putting words to that and then challenging that, do I really think that's true? Do I think that people are cursed? If I don't think that anyone else is, I don't think anyone else is cursed, right? But I am. And so maybe now I should go revisit that, right? And this is the curiosity. If we start thinking about ourselves, we can change, really, we can change everything, because we can have so much greater control over what's going on inside of us, and it can match up with what we really and truly believe, instead of running along inside of us in a negative way, and we haven't even put words to it or decided if we actually believe it or not.
The stories in your book were so helpful because it allows, or at least it allowed me to see myself in your experience and then extrapolate similar things. Could you explain, for example, just one story and how it relates to what that little voice in your head started to say in terms of, like, I'm cursed. Bad things are always going to happen to me. It works out for everybody else, but not me.
I think one of the most powerful stories, at least in the way that it impacted me, was the person. I wrote about a person who had what is called called Cotard's syndrome. It's the feeling that one has already died when one is still alive. So this isn't a metaphor. They're going through, they go to the grocery store, they do all sorts of things in a normal way, but they believe that they are dead, that they have perished, but their body is still moving along in the world around them. And it's quite rare, but it's certainly not unheard of. And the gentleman that I took care of was sure that he was dead. And he thought it was funny that I would put the stethoscope up and listen to the heart of a dead man, or that I would come and spend time with him, and that it was just the same as if he were in the morgue, but that part of it hadn't happened yet. And when you look at the history of a person like that, this was a person who was very affable. He had a good sense of humor, and it was kind of fun to be around, but he had been around no people for so long. He had lived in loneliness and isolation without any real human connection. And the dialogue in his mind had gone from, say, bad to worse to almost unimaginable, to, well, I'll be okay even though I don't have anyone in my life. I don't have any friends. I don't have a partner, but I'll find one, to I won't find one, to that's not for you, to you don't get to have any people in your life. And this was running along over and over for many, many years of loneliness and isolation that got to the point of feeling so little human connection that the man was sure that he'd actually died already.
Wow.
So it's a strong, strong example, but it shows where the dialogue that we're having with ourselves, or what we're telling ourselves, can do to us over time. So if it can make us believe that we're dead, what impact can it have on a person who says, I'll never get a better job, I'll never find a partner, I'll never have a better relationship with my kids? If we can make ourselves believe that we're dead from the distress that's going on, we can do almost anything to ourselves that limits our horizons, limits our health and our happiness.
What I'm processing right now is the connection between the little voice and the kind of story that you keep telling to yourself, and how that then becomes the actions that you take or not. And so as you started to tell that story about a person who was lonely, and there's a lot of loneliness in the world right now, and the story, if you were paying attention, started to shift from I'm lonely to I'm not going to I'm always going to be like this. And if you are telling yourself that you're never going to find friends, you're not going to feel motivated to leave the house. You're truly convincing yourself. And in a more pedestrian kind of example that we can all relate to is if you've ever fallen off the wagon with your own health and you start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get back in shape again, or I don't have the willpower to eat healthy. All of that little voice is instrumental in you not taking the actions that would change that situation. Is that why this is so imperative that we pay attention to? One of the reasons?
Yes. I believe in 25 years of doing what I do for a living, is taking care of people and being a psychiatrist, being a therapist, I have seen over and over and over again that what we're telling ourselves in here is far more deterministic than any external factor. So someone who wants to go back to the gym and wants to be in better shape, wants to lose weight again, or whatever it is that person's trying to achieve, we could say, well, they should carve out the time for it, or they should, what gyms are close, and they should make that a priority, and how can they change their scheduling? And we can look at that in so many ways, but if what's running over and over inside is, oh, you'll never succeed, or you'll get in shape, but then you'll lose it again, and you'll just feel worse about yourself. It's so much more deterministic than the external factors, often without us being aware of the tremendous impact of what is going on inside of us. And this is where, we often carry along, I'll imagine sometimes, a person who could be living life so much better. They have everything inside of them. They have everything they need for life to be so much better. But I'll imagine it's almost as if they're dragging around the weights of the past, and they're taking them from the past and projecting them into the future. And we can all do this. And one might argue, to some extent, all of us, or at least the vast majority of us, do this to some extent, but we often do this to an extent that is actually deterministic about what happens next in our lives. And this is where repetition makes such a difference, that often if something doesn't go right, we try again, but we try again in the same way. So people will come in, just to take the relationship example. This happens a lot, and would happen a lot when I was seeing a lot of new patients all the time for many, many years. And people would come in and say, oh, you can't, I know you can't help me. I know I'm only here because someone thought I should go, or because I'm just desperate, but I know you can't help me. And then they would tell me about repetition. There's no way I'm going to have a good job. My last 4 jobs, and then they'll tell me about the last 4 jobs, or I'll never have a good relationship. Let me tell you about my last 5 relationships, right? And they're not, the jobs, the relationships are not different. And they're the same. It's the same thing that has happened multiple times. And I found myself saying to someone who'll tell me they'll never have a good relationship and I cannot help them because the last 7 have been so bad. And then sometimes I'll say, if you can tell me how they've been bad in 7 different ways, then I might have to agree with you. But that's not what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me something that's 7 variations of the same thing, of the same story. And that can provide us with so much help. If you realize I haven't done something that's failed 7 times. I've done one thing that hasn't gone the way I wanted it to. Now, the fact that I've done it multiple times just tells me, hey, I need to look at that. How can I do that differently? And now we can open up a world of change because we can learn from the past. The past is good information. Right? But it no longer seems as if it's fate that's projecting into our future. And this is the benefit of exploration, whether it's in therapy or it's reflecting about ourselves. It's much better done if we're writing or we're talking with someone of, hey, what's going on inside of me? And how do I understand that? But understand it so I can use it to my advantage, right? So that it's not then controlling me and making foregone conclusions to my next 15 decisions.
I am so happy you're here. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for checking this video out. And if you like this one, I have a feeling you're going to like this one too. I'll see you there.